Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking installment of the Map Round Show. This is the Built in California series, and with me on the line from, of all places, California, go figure, is the founder and CEO of TRACON Pharma. His name is Charles Theuer. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. No, it's great to be with you. And yeah, I've been at TRACON for 15 years now. It's a pleasure to make
Okay.
your acquaintance.
Very well. Yeah, likewise. So you guys are doing some incredible things. So I'm super excited to get your story on record. But for our viewers around the world, Charles, who haven't heard about TRACON and what you guys are doing, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and paint a picture for us on, or give us the elevator pitch rather, on what TRACON's up to?
Perfect, Matt. Yeah, so my background, I trained initially in college as a molecular biologist, trying to understand cancer pathways, and then went to medical school. And I was a cancer surgeon for many years at UCLA and at UC Irvine, focusing mainly on gastrointestinal cancers like colon cancer, stomach cancer, pancreatic cancer. But I'd done a lot of research on antibodies, and antibodies became an important class of cancer therapeutics over the last 20 years. And so I was recruited to join a biotech company here in San Diego called IDEC, which actually brought the world probably the most successful antibody-based therapy for cancer still ever yet discovered, called Rituxan, which was a drug for a cancer type called lymphoma. Was at IDEC for many years, then went to Pfizer and worked on another cancer drug that became approved as the drug Sutent, which really revolutionized the care of kidney cancer, which up to that point really had very poor therapies in terms of what was available to patients. And Sutent really transformed the options in the care of those patients. I went to a private company and then came to TRACON about 15 years ago. TRACON's focused on cancer therapeutics. We're focused on trying to give patients with rare cancers that have really poor treatment options better options. So we're currently developing a drug in what's called a pivotal trial. A pivotal trial means a trial designed to generate the data that will be the basis for approval of a new product. And we're doing that in sarcoma in the pivotal ENVASARC trial. And what we're trying to do is really develop a drug that's both safer and more effective than the current available standard of care, which really works in a very minimal way. We have a great team at TRACON. We also do business in a different way than many pharmaceutical companies that I'll touch on as we discuss the company during today's talk.
Cool. So we'll get into all of the meat and the potatoes there. But let's talk about sarcoma for a moment. Um, so I know there's a number of cancers here, but what is the issue here? Like in terms of, is it diagnosis, is it treatment, and why is this problem a problem that you guys should be solving?
Yeah, a great question, Matt. So sarcoma is a rarer tumor, so it's rarer than common tumors like lung cancer or colon cancer. Unfortunately, when it's discovered, it's typically with a large tumor that, if cured by surgery, is great, but if it's not cured by surgery, then it needs medical therapy. And the medical therapies for advanced or metastatic, meaning sarcoma that's spread, are woefully inadequate. So a patient story may be a way to think about this disease. So if a patient has sarcoma, it's advanced and can't be cured by surgery, or it's spread to different parts of the body. They have a couple medicines that are approved for their cancer, but they're not very effective. So the most common and the standard of care for sarcoma patients who are newly diagnosed that need systemic therapy is a drug called doxorubicin, which was literally approved in 1975. So it gives you an idea of how little progress has been made in this tumor class when you think about the fact that the most effective therapy was discovered almost 50 years ago. And it's called the red devil, and that refers to two things. It's the color of the drug when it's in an IV bag being given to a patient is red, but the real issue is the devil part, and that reflects the side effect profile of the drug. It's very tough to take. It causes GI upset. It suppresses your bone marrow's ability to make white blood cells, which leaves you open to infection. And it even can cause your heart to function poorly and cause heart failure. But that's the best we have right now for sarcoma patients. Its response rate's about 16%. meaning most patients don't respond at all. Even the patients that do respond, it's a transient response, meaning they'll recur.
Mm.
And the sarcoma patients that fail doxorubicin, which is basically every patient that takes the drug, unfortunately, the ones with certain subtypes that are the focal point of our clinical trial have one approved drug for their treatment, and that has an even lower response rate of 4%. And that's also a toxic drug that can cause liver failure. So we need new treatments for sarcoma patients. A lot of companies don't focus on sarcoma because it's a rare tumor, so the return on investment may not work for them as a company. But the reason that TRACON can focus on sarcoma really twofold. We really want to address unmet need populations of patients that really need new therapies. And we can do it in rare tumors because we develop drugs at a much lower cost than most pharmaceutical companies. And I can tell you more about our model of drug development as we go through the talk today, but it's really what separates us from the pack and lets us generate a return on investment even in rare cancers.
It's really interesting that that observation. It's quite. I don't know what's going on with the universe lately, but like, like I'm talking to a lot of healthcare startups or innovative companies such as TRACON, MedTech, Biopharma. It seems like there's a lot of innovation now all of a sudden. To your point though, around the fact that there hasn't been really available therapies, or current available therapies are kind of like inadequate. There's not really been any innovation since 1975. That's a long time ago. I mean, like things have changed in a lot of other spaces. I mean, we're talking about Web3 and blockchain and, you know, all sorts of crazy ideas that weren't even discussed, you know, in 1995, let alone 1975. So why hasn't there been innovation in this space, Charles?
It's a great question, Matt. So when you think about drug development, it's a complicated process. So you have to discover new molecules, and then once you discover new molecules that are potentially new drugs, you have to prove that they're safe and effective in clinical trials. And in the pharmaceutical business, there actually is a lot of innovation in terms of discovering potential new drugs. And they move through the clinical trials process, unfortunately, at a fairly slow pace. And that's really where I feel the lack of innovation in our business has retarded the development of new drugs, especially for rare tumor types. And that's the clinical trial process. You know, it may surprise some of your listeners to realize that about $2 billion is spent to approve each new drug. I mean, that's the price of innovation. And the majority of that money is spent not in actually discovering the molecule or the antibody, the actual drug itself, but the majority of the money is spent in proving it's safe and effective to the rigorous standards of the FDA that allow it to then be approved and then marketed. And the way clinical trials are conducted today has not changed probably in 30 or 40 years. And it's a counterproductive process in terms of the way clinical trials are done actually encourage high cost, slow timelines, and sometimes really poor quality. And I'll go into that in a little more detail with you. And it's something we've overcome at TRACON through our unique business model.
Yeah, so one of the things you were talking to me about, Charles, was this. It was like when you're actually doing a clinical trials, or when you think about the trials process, like let's just say it's a $6 trial, only $5 actually goes to the contract research organization. And what you guys are doing through your own proprietary drug development process is you're able to do 3 times the amount of trials as any other company. Please unpack that for us so we understand.
Yeah. No, I think it's so important. So the way most companies conduct clinical trials is they don't have the people or the systems internally that lets them do a clinical trial. For instance, when you do a clinical trial, a patient's treated at a cancer center. All that data from that patient is sent to a database, and then all the data is analyzed to show the drug's safe and effective. And the way you conduct the trial is under a very rigorous regulatory body and guidelines that are set forth by the FDA. But most companies, even big pharma companies, and especially small companies, don't have the ability to do it themselves. And so they'll outsource the conduct of a clinical trial to what's called a clinical research organization, or CRO. The problem with the CROs is the way that they are paid. So imagine you're running a business and you get paid fee for service, but you also get paid a monthly management fee, even if you do no work. Now, not many businesses actually run that way because most people wouldn't ever become a patron of a business that's paid in that way, right? Basically, you're going to pay someone if they do no work. But unfortunately, the way CROs get paid is exactly that way. A CRO gets paid fee for service. So if a patient's enrolled and they have to enter data for the patient in the database and they have to collect those data and analyze it, they get paid. That's fee for service. But even if a patient's not enrolled at the site, the CRO still gets paid and they get paid a monthly management fee. So you can understand that the longer the trial takes, the more the CRO gets paid. So they have no real incentive. In fact, they have an economic disincentive to do the trial quickly, to do it at high quality, and to do it at low cost. So to your point, my estimate is that for every $6 a sponsor pays to do a trial, $5 goes to the CRO and only $1 goes to the site. So the two parties that suffer in this relationship are the sponsor that pays all the money and the site that actually enrolls the patients and gets paid a very small amount of that total budget. So there are two crises. One is the crisis, the trials are taking too long and costing too much because of the CRO. The other crisis is actually the clinical site. They get such a little portion of the actual money spent to do a trial that they're typically losing money, and they may not be able to retain their staff because their staff can leave and go to a CRO and make more money. So that's the issue in clinical research right now. Trials take forever because the economic incentive is for the CRO to go slow. Sites can't retain people to actually enroll patients. And we've come to the conclusion that the way to fix the system is to do trials yourself and do it in a different way. And we will actually do trials for companies in lieu of a CRO, but we'll be paid for performance, meaning we're paid as the patients enroll in the study, the same way a site is paid as patients enrolled in the study. So we're paid with the incentive to enroll patients and not paid to sit on our hands and do nothing. And so when you internalize operations, you can run your own trials at about a third the cost of a CRO-based trial. And you can also help other companies engage in what we call a pay-for-performance model so that they're working with a partner that's incentivized to do the trial at high quality and quickly and at a budget that they promised at the onset of the contract.
And so you can do this without getting any kind of FDA in terms of like the process itself, so the development process. You can do this autonomously without FDA regulations or anything like that, right?
Well, to be clear, so we abide by every FDA regulation.
Yeah.
And that's usually the point where companies will pull back and say, you know what, we don't want to invest the time or buy the systems to comply with the FDA Code of Federal Regulations or FDA guidelines. But at TRACON, we have a lot of experience. Our team was at Pfizer, for example. We know how to do things in the right way, according to FDA regulations and the Code of Federal Regulations. And so we're able to do that. And we use the same integrated systems from vendors that also supply those systems to CROs. So the systems are top of the line, the people are top of the line, and we have all the standard operating procedures and work instructions to do it the right way. And when you have the right people, the right systems, and do it the right way, you realize that actually you can do trials at really low cost. In our case, at least a third of the cost of a CRO, because we're not making a profit off ourselves when we're doing our own trials. We want to do them quickly, at high quality, and at low cost. Whereas a CRO, their business model, the whole reason for a CRO to be around is to make a profit. And in fact, there's a mantra that gives you an idea of how CROs operate that I've heard. It's called bid to win, manage to profit. So when a CRO goes to a sponsor, they want to bid to win. They want to get that bid. But then once they have that bid, that sponsor is kind of caught in what I call CRO quicksand. And at that point, the CRO is going to manage to profit, meaning create as many services as they can and create as many project management fees, which means the longer the trial, the more fees they can generate, which is not exactly at all what the company wants, which is a trial done quickly, on time, at low cost, but at high quality. That's the rub, if you will.
Yeah. Charles, I can see a book in your near future, you know, called like the Insight CRO, the future of drug development.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Matt. So we have written a book. Actually, I've got a copy here.
Oh, really? I see. I knew it was coming.
Unnecessary expense. The reason we call it unnecessary expense is because our view is that the typical pharmaceutical company who's hiring a CRO to do their trials is paying an unnecessary expense. They're paying that fee for service plus monthly management fee that they wouldn't have to pay if they took the time and did this trial themselves. And if they did that, they literally would save about 70% of their clinical development costs. And think about that. A phase 2 trial that may cost the company $180 million to do with a CRO, and that's a typical cost for phase 3 studies in our business, $180 million. If they did it the TRACON way, they might be able to get away with a trial for $60 million. And if they learned our systems, and we are willing to teach people to do it our way, if they learn to do trials the TRACON way with top of the line systems, abide by all the FDA guidelines, use our standard operating procedures, our work instructions, they could save that 70% per trial on every trial they ever did. And suddenly we'd be developing 3 drugs for the price of every one. And the innovation that you talked about that hasn't been in our industry would suddenly change dramatically. And that's what we're really trying to push forward aggressively.
Yeah, I mean, I went headed on over to clinicaltrials.gov, put in cancer, just to maybe put the 70% saving into perspective for everyone. There's so for cancer, actively recruiting for a clinical trial now, there's 18,452 studies. It's a massive number and a lot of costs. Imagine like maybe like how much does it, what did you say it was to develop one trial start to finish? It was 2 billion.
Yeah,
Right?
the average cost to prove a new drug now is estimated about 2.5 billion. And the reason that's true, Matt, is 2 things. So one is the incredible cost, but also most drugs don't reach the final finish line. So many drugs fail during development. So when you take into account that many drugs fail, and that cost is included, the total cost to approve a single drug, including the failures and the drug that actually works, is about 2.5 billion. But if you did it at a much more economical cost, that literally could be a third less than that. And you start thinking about that, maybe that could affect the fact that drug prices are expensive because drug companies need to make a return on investment. If the investment's lower, then the return could be lower and they could still have just as profitable a business. So the implications of doing trials, if you will, in an economical, high quality, and timely manner could have great effect on our entire industry and in fact, our entire ecosystem. And that's what we're trying to really help educate companies to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, if you think, well, what would you say is the outcome then? Imagine if all these 18,000, trials were done in a more cost-effective manner. Excuse me. What would you say would happen as a consequence of that? Would we see more successful, more innovation in terms of cancer therapeutics and drugs and treatments and things like that? Like, what would the world look like if they adopted your type of drug development process?
Yeah, I think we see things move forward in 3 different kind of directions. So if companies, if CROs are aligned are not aligned with companies to do trials quickly. So the first thing is I think you'd see drugs develop more quickly, because if you're working with a CRO who makes more money the longer a trial takes, you can imagine there's very little incentive to actually do the trial quickly. So you could do trials more quickly. The other thing I think you'd see is higher quality. If a CRO does a trial, they're not invested in the drug, whether the trial's done well or poorly, the quality of the data may not be that meaningful to them. And I do know, for instance, of trials where sponsors have invested an incredible amount of money in a trial and they felt like the trial was negative because the quality of the data was poor. And when the quality of the data is poor, you kind of get this noise in the system and you're not able to detect the treatment effects. So that's one other area where the quality can actually be affected, which could be the difference between a drug being shown to work or not work. And then the final thing is just the cost. If instead of $2.5 billion per approved drug, let's just say that's 800,000. Just think about that. A lot of these companies could potentially invest in rarer cancers. Like the reason we can invest in sarcoma is because we can do these trials at such low cost. So we can generate a return on investment in a rarer cancer type. However, a big pharma company that's going with a CRO may only be able to generate a return on investment in a large tumor type and may say, small tumor types don't work for us. We can't make any money there. So
Mm.
it changes the dynamic across many dimensions.
So, Charles, what's the market opportunity then for what you're doing in the sarcoma space?
So in sarcoma, for example, at a typical price of a new drug, our revenues projected upon initial approval are about $300 million
Hmm.
annual revenues, peak revenues. We also are going to advance our drug into the frontline setting. So initially, we're dosing patients in the refractory setting after they fail therapy. We are currently starting a trial actually in the frontline setting, and that's our eventual goal, is to approve our drug not just in refractory sarcoma, but as soon as the patient's diagnosed in the frontline setting. And if we can do that, we feel we could grow revenues to about $1 billion. And
Hmm.
that sounds like a lot of money, and it is, to be clear. What makes it so attractive for us is that we're able to execute our pivotal trial. That trial, we expect to show the safety and efficacy that will be the basis for approval of our drug for about $25 million. So instead of doing our pivotal trial for the 200 or $300 million I talked about earlier, that's typical of many companies, with our cost-effective model, we can do it for about 25 million. So you can see why we can generate a nice return on investment when you think about even an early peak market opportunity of 300 million, when your investment is 25 million, whereas a company that needs to invest 2 to 300 million for that same trial may not see that peak revenues initially of 300 million make sense for them. So that's why it changes the entire equation when you can be efficient in your clinical trial
Mm.
implementation.
Yeah, it really does. So, what have you guys developed, or what are you currently developing? So, is it envafolimab? Is that? I'm
Well
sorry.
done. It's a tough one.
Did I say
So
that right?
you
Okay.
did. Yeah. So envafolimab is a very special drug. So it's a drug that's approved already as the world's first approved subcutaneous checkpoint inhibitor. And let me take that complicated sentence apart. So in the last 10 years, the pharmaceutical industry has recognized that we can activate the patient's own immune system to attack the tumor. And there are drugs that are now billion-dollar products. So one's Keytruda, marketed by Merck. Another's Opdivo, marketed by BMS, and they do exactly that. They turn on a patient's immune system to attack the tumor and can have very dramatic effects in many cancer types. For instance, Keytruda is approved in over 15 different types of cancers, and its sales are well over $10 billion annually. It will become most likely the biggest cancer drug ever in terms of overall revenue, supplanting the drug I worked on at IDEC called Rituxan. So we recognize that mechanism, the ability to activate a patient's own immune system to attack its cancer, also was relevant in certain sarcoma patients. However, we also recognize that big pharma companies weren't going to try to approve their drug for those patients, and it may reflect what we talked about, that the market's not quite big enough for them. So we licensed envafolimab to meet that need in sarcoma, but we wanted to do it with what we call a best-in-class product. Now, all the checkpoint inhibitors that I mentioned that are approved are given intravenously, meaning a patient has to go to an infusion center, they have to wait for a chair, they get an IV, they get pre-medication, they get their infusion over, say, 30 minutes to an hour. They may get an infusion reaction, which can be very discomforting to a patient. It can be a shaking chill, or it can even be more dangerous, like respiratory difficulties. And then finally, they're done, and then they actually go see their doctor. Now, imagine if there was a drug you could get, like you got, say, your flu shot, where you saw your doctor in clinic and he said, Matt, time for your flu shot. Nurse comes in, gives you a flu shot. 30 seconds later, you go home. That's the promise of envafolimab. It's not given IV or intravenously. It's given as a sub-Q injection. So the way we give envafolimab is the patient's seen in the clinic. After the visit, time for your envafolimab injection. It's given in 30 seconds. And because it's given subcutaneously, you don't get this massive bolus of drug in your veins all at one time that causes infusion reactions. So it's more convenient for the patient, for the physician, and safer in the sense that you don't see infusion reactions. So what we're doing with envafolimab and sarcoma is two things. We're meeting an unmet need for a patient population in desperate need of new therapies. And we're doing it with what we consider the most convenient and the safest checkpoint inhibitor of all those available in the world. So it's really an exciting program because it really is two important concepts: meet the unmet need, but do it with a best-in-class product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like a sustainable unfair advantage for you guys.
We think, and it's a great advantage for the patients. I mean, that's what it's all about. And I think both physicians and patients really embrace the ability to get dosed in the clinic.
Okay. And it's typically a 10-year development cycle, isn't it?
Yeah. So what we're doing with envafolimab is trying to make sure every sarcoma patient who could benefit from what's called immunotherapy, or the therapies that trigger the immune system to attack tumors, will have access to the drug. So we're initially starting off in the refractory setting, patients that fail chemotherapy that can respond to checkpoint inhibitors are enrolling in our pivotal trial. But we literally just started our frontline trial, which is to show that we can combine envafolimab with the frontline chemotherapy we talked about earlier, knowing that if we can give our drug with standard therapy as soon as the patient's diagnosed, we might see the best benefit for the patients. And that's our eventual goal, to make sure every patient who can benefit from immunotherapy with sarcoma can get it in the frontline setting. And to have that program fully roll out with the expectation of approval in the frontline setting, will take many years. We hope not quite 10, but it'll take at least 5 years to get the drug potentially approved in the frontline setting.
Well, the sooner the better for for
Fair
everyone.
enough.
Hurry
Fair
up,
enough.
get it done. So look, Charles, obviously doing what you guys are doing, it's hard. Like it's really, really hard. And I think as a team, you've been around for 15 years, as you touched on, um, and I'm curious to give our audience around the world some insights into like how you guys approach failure, because there
Mhm.
must be so many
Yeah.
countless iterations of like, oh shit, like that didn't work, and so what would you say, Charles, has been in the last 15 years, or maybe you could pick a sarcoma example because we're talking about that, but what would you say has been like the biggest failure for you guys, and what have you as an individual, and by extension maybe the team, have learnt from that experience?
It's a great question. It's really a perfect question for us at TRACON, because in 2019, Matt, we actually had a big failure. So envafolimab is our current drug candidate being advanced in a pivotal trial in sarcoma. But in 2019, we had a separate drug that was being developed in a separate type of sarcoma. It's called angiosarcoma. It was a big phase 3 study. We'd implemented it at about 35 sites around the world. And unfortunately, at the time of analysis, the drug was shown not to be effective. And so we had to stop the trial. And as you can imagine, when your lead program is shown to be not effective, as a company, you will suffer.
Mm.
And that happens a lot in biotech. A lot of companies, almost every biotech company, will have to focus on one lead program that's the major driver of value. And given drug development's risky, if that program fails, many times the company will fail. And you see that all the time in biotech, where companies have a negative trial, the company fails, they lay off staff, they merge with another company who takes advantage, for instance, of their existing cash, and the game's over. The reason that didn't happen at TRACON is because we have the superior business model. Because we had, for the last 10 years, the ability to do our own trials with our own team and be independent of CRO, and do them at a third the cost of other companies, do them more quickly, do them at higher quality, companies really recognized how valuable that was. And so we did partnerships with big pharma companies like Johnson and Johnson, who wanted to take advantage of our model development. And then we also did partnerships with companies, including our two important partners, 3D Medicines and I-Mab Oncology, from which we were able to partner and collaborate on envafolimab. So really having a superior business model, which is the CRO independent, we call it product development platform, allowed us to rebuild our pipeline such that today we're a stronger company than we were in 2019. And it really played into the fact we had a model of development that was really the foundation of our company. And so we weren't just a pipeline company, we were a product development platform company that with an exciting pipeline built through other companies wanting to access our platform.
Hmm. Um, so I'm curious to understand, like, let's say you guys get, run through all your trials and it's approved, and you guys are ready to rock and roll. what happens then? Like, how do you scale something like that? I mean, obviously, as you touched on, you have this innovative approach from a development perspective. You obviously have a unique business model, which has allowed you to fail, whereas others would have killed companies. Here you are, fully capitalized, listed on the NASDAQ. Um, so how do you scale something like a sarcoma rather, treatment or drug?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, sarcoma is our initial focus, but I'd say it's exemplifies our goal to transform cancer care, and we're starting with sarcoma. Just I think it probably is the highest need cancer out there, but our goal is to affect cancer patients much more broadly than that, and we have assets that can do that. And so our goal, to your point, is focus on envafolimab, to approve the drug, to commercialize the drug, and then once we have a commercial team selling envafolimab, we have 4 other drugs currently in our pipeline. The goal is to take those forward as well. Some of those combined with envafolimab, some of them stand on their own. But our goal is to continue to kind of search the world for exciting assets, drug candidates that can meet unmet need populations in cancer, take those into our portfolio, plug them into our platform, develop them quickly at low cost and high quality, and address many unmet needs for many patients. And unfortunately, there are more than enough unmet needs in cancer to keep us busy for years. In terms of the platform, what's beautiful about our platform is the systems are in place. And so we have people that are using those systems, but we can expand that base of people and run many more trials based on the fact that when the systems are in place, it's really training people to use those systems. And then you can continue to widen your base in terms of the number of drugs you're developing. But even now, we're looking for new assets with our existing team to plug into our platform. We actually have capacity even now to do more trials with exciting, potentially first-in-class or best-in-class drug candidates.
When did you guys list on the NASDAQ?
So we listed in 2015, and it was really based on the lead program that, unfortunately, by 2019 had negative data. So we've been listed for 7 years.
Okay. And so I'm curious because I've actually had a few founders on the show who have used the public markets to fund their startups and their businesses and so forth. Why did you choose, or why was the public markets chosen for something like this? For instance, is it just what pharma companies do? It's public market funding. Like I know Bioseg, there's as I mentioned, there's a bunch coming on the show, and a lot of them have gone public markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our history was kind of typical private to public. So when we were founded early in our genesis, we were founded through, I'd call an angel investor that initially funded the company. We raised some capital through some private bridge financing or some private investments. And then we secured typical venture capital funding around 2010. And that was from venture capitalists. We still maintain it as a private company. We had venture capitalists on our board, and we raised money from them until the time of around 2014. And at that time, we started seeing some positive data with our programs. We engaged in an important partnership where a partner was developing our drug in eye disease, similar to the way we were developing it in cancer. And we recognized we were going to move into the late stages of clinical trial testing, where you need a significant amount of capital. Even when you do it yourself, you still need significant amounts of capital to complete a phase 3 trial. And so for us, it was appropriate to access the public markets in 2015 to raise a sizable amount of capital that would fund the phase 3 study that we were about to engage upon. And so that was really the reason, Matt. You could stay private and continue to raise through private sources, but it is easier at certain points, and you have more access to capital in general through the public markets. And given where we were in terms of now moving from early to late stage development company, it was the appropriate time for us to do that in 2015.
Yeah, I suppose the payback period for a retail investor or public market investor is like they're less concerned. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if you went to a VC and you're like, you got 3 years, pal. And you're like, no, it's a 10-year journey, my man. And then there's like another 5 years of scaling up from there. So, hang on.
Yeah. No, they're definitely different investment horizons, to your point, private versus public investors. And, with public investors, if you can attract long-only healthcare or institutional funds that understand you've got a pipeline with near-term commercial value, but you have a superior business model that lets you continue to grow the company, that's a beautiful thing to have that kind of investor behind your company.
What are the do's and don'ts of marketing a drug like the ones you guys are developing? Let's say that the trials are successful, you've FDA has approved it, you're ready to go to market. What's involved in that space?
Commercialization is a whole nother kind of complicated part of being a biotech company. So, there's discovery, there's development, which is running the trials, and there's commercialization. So, that takes a whole separate, I'd say, set of expertise that we're looking to recruit to the company, actually starting next year, as we plan to potentially launch this product in early 2025. I think the benefits we have are the following. So we expect to launch a product, envafolimab, where the mechanism of action, the ability to activate a patient's immune system to attack the tumor, it's well understood by physicians because there are other products approved that also use work by that same mechanism of action. I think that's a big positive. I also think the potential best-in-class aspect of envafolimab is a big positive, the convenience of subcutaneous dosing for a patient. You may see, for example, I seem to always see these Dupixent ads on TV, this injectable drug for an autoimmune disease. I think it's marketed by Amgen, but it seems like I see those like every other hour when I'm watching the news. But it just shows you, if a patient can dose themselves with a drug, it has such advantages, and that's our eventual goal with envafolimab. So there are certain aspects of envafolimab, the fact that it addresses a high unmet need population with sarcoma, the fact that it is a known mechanism of action, so you know how it works and it's understood by physicians, the fact that it has that best-in-class profile with respect to dosing, I think, and then the potential patients also injecting and treating themselves. I think all those may be really beneficial to us as we go into the commercialization stage, which we anticipate will be, not too far away.
What are you struggling with at the moment? Like, what occupies your mind in terms of, like, I'm trying to resolve this thing. What is that?
I think the biggest thing with respect to drug development currently is we would love to help other companies learn to do drug development the TRACON way. That's what occupies my mind. So we're really happy with our progress on our pipeline, the progress of the envafolimab trial, which is called ENVASARC. We're actually accruing ahead of schedule, which I think helps people understand that if you do a trial in an unmet need population, you can do it actually quite quickly. But what I really want to see happen, Matt, I want to see us be able to help other companies, what I call avoid the zero quicksand. Get out of that quicksand, or better yet, don't step into it in the first place. Let us teach you how to do your own trials with your own team. You'll enjoy the same benefits that we do, which is benefits of cost savings, time savings, and higher quality trials. And if you want to get started where we do the trial for you, using that pay for performance model where we're only paid based on accruing patients the same way a site is paid, we're happy to do that so you can get comfortable with what we do and how our systems work. And then maybe you can go ahead and move into what we call franchise model, and we'll teach you the systems so that you can become truly CRO independent yourself. And if everyone got into that mindset and adopted our work practices, the ecosystem would change dramatically. And this innovation block that you kind of mentioned coming on to the call, right now the bottleneck is at clinical development. And if we can remove that bottleneck, all these great discoveries, which are just being held up because trials aren't executed quickly, that would be relieved to some degree, and potentially to a great degree, if more and more companies adopted our model, and things would change. I should point out there are certain companies that, in my view, get it, that have done what TRACON does. They become CRO independent. And these are big companies like Seagen, companies like BeiGene, big pharmaceutical companies get the benefits of becoming CRO independent, but not enough companies, in my view, have moved to that. The pendulum hasn't swung far enough over, if you will, in my opinion, and more companies could definitely benefit by adopting our work practices.
Certainly sounds like it. Charles, I'd love to have a bit of fun with you for a moment. So if I could give you the keys to the Matt Brown Show time machine, and you could go back to yourself on day one of your TRACON journey, what advice would you give yourself about building this business?
That's a great question. I think early in our genesis, I think we could have. So we had a really tight knit team, which I was really proud of. And we survived tough times like 2008, 9, 10, when the biotech markets were really, really in tough straits. So I think we built an incredible team. I think we also did well. We diversified our pipeline early. But we did become a company, and it's hard to avoid this. We did become a company that was really emphasizing one key asset, and that was the asset we talked about that unfortunately failed in 2019. So, if we could have raised more capital to have more of a diversified pipeline that was at the similar late stage of development, so that when one asset, if you will, failed, another asset was at the same equivalent time, level of development, that we could have just continued on our plans to commercialize in that time frame based on asset B versus asset A. That would have been ideal. And that may sound like such a simple thing to do. It's just, as a company, with respect to how expensive it is to just do late stage trials, it's hard to do that. And sometimes it's hard to get investors to focus on two assets rather than just to say, we're going to bet on one. Because as an investor, you can bet on multiple companies, each with a late stage asset. You don't have to bet on one company that has two or maybe even three assets all at the same stage of development. But ideally, that's what I would have liked to have done, was to have not all the value in the company really attached to one asset at the time where that asset did not reach its endpoint in the trial. What I am proud of is the fact that we developed this unique business model that allowed us then to rebuild our pipeline without having to turn over the company, if you will. And so that's what I was really proud of as a company, is doing something that most companies don't do. Most companies just focus on the pipeline. If the pipeline fails, the company fails. We developed a model that we could then use as the basis for continuing operations and rebuild a pipeline that right now is even more exciting than it was even back in the days of 2019.
Yeah, your breakdowns are always your breakthroughs in many cases.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
Well, Charles, it's been a real privilege having you here. I mean, I think what I love, talking to you specifically is that for you, it's obviously about business and that, but it's certainly your motivations are very much mission focused. And I think, I lost a friend to cancer a month ago, and like, it's bullshit that there's no innovation since 1970. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy to hear that those sorts of stories, and the fact that you guys are taking the risk and doing the hard things about hard things. It's kudos to you and your team. So looking forward to seeing where you guys are going to go in the future.
Many thanks, Matt. And again, really appreciate your time, taking time to meet us, meet our team, or meet me, and through me, kind of meeting our team. And we are a mission focused company, to your point, and we expect to make a big difference for patients that really need new options. So thank you for your time as well.
Anytime. Thanks, everybody. See you soon. Ciao.